Kelda Roys is one of the few Democratic candidates for governor Wisconsin Eye has not interviewed, so we're going to fix that right now. Kelda, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thanks, Steve, for having me.
I looked at the average age of 8 other most experienced candidates, and that average is 60. You're 38.
Yes.
What important, fresh perspective does your youth bring to this campaign?
Well, thank you for calling me youth as I enter middle age. But I think that, the main thing is that Gen X and millennials are leaving this state in droves. In some cases, young, educated people are our biggest export, and we need to fix that. We also need to do it by addressing the generational economic issues that I think are very different from what the baby boomers faced. Things like student loan debt, addressing that crisis. We have nearly 1 million borrowers that owe about $24 billion in student loan debt. And you can't refinance it like you can refinance a mortgage or a car loan in most cases. We also need to address the high cost of childcare and make it more affordable by expanding access to early childhood education and universal 3K and 4K. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to make Wisconsin a leader in providing paid family leave for all people, regardless of their employment status.
Do you hope to ride a blue wave or year of the woman into the governor's office, Kelda?
Well, I think it's great to see so much enthusiasm on the Democratic side, but I do think that Democrats win with hope. We can't win with anger and fear and division. We win with hope and optimism, and people really want to vote for something. They're not just going to go and vote against Trump or vote against the governor. We want a candidate who can make Wisconsin a place of opportunity and fairness again, and who can make our state what we should be, the place that is the best in the country to raise a family and the best to grow a business.
You mentioned the baby boomers earlier. How have baby boomer politicians and elected officials failed your generation and your children's generation?
Well, that's a bit of a loaded question. There's a lot of wonderful baby boomers out there, including my parents. But I think that, the reality is too many things have been put on the credit card and too many tough decisions have been delayed, right? The current governor has failed to address things like the student loan debt crisis. He has defunded education for everything from K-12 to the university system, which is, the most important economic engine of our state, and failed to address things like climate change. And I think we're seeing the effects of putting things on the credit card when it comes to our roads, where now we're spending twice as much on debt service for just basic road repair and maintenance.
22 or 23%.
Right. And I think when he came in, it was something like 10 or 11%. So that is all money that my kids are going to have to pay off. And by failing to address the healthcare crisis, we're just increasing costs, not just for our state and for our taxpayers, but for small business owners. There are so many lost opportunities over the past several years that are actually going to end up costing us quite a bit more to solve these problems. And that's why we must elect someone as governor who is ready to tackle these challenges and bring solutions.
I want to come back to some of these specific issues, but first an overview question. I was intrigued, your breastfeeding YouTube video went viral.
It did.
What message were you sending with that?
I was sending a message that I'm a real person, and I think people who know me from politics know that I'm an effective lawmaker and leader and somebody who stands up for what she believes in. But I'm also a mother and a stepmother, and I'm very deeply invested in the future of this state. And I'm just very gratified that people responded so positively to the video. And I think it's great for people to see representations of parents and of women who are able to be great professionals and leaders and also very present parents.
Now, you served 2 terms in the state assembly, then ran for Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a short summary of what you've been doing since then, please.
Well, other than having 2 wonderful kids and raising my 2 older stepdaughters, I've been building a business. So I'm a small business owner and an entrepreneur, and my company is sort of a high-tech real estate brokerage. And over the last 5 years, I've grown it to serve customers in 41 counties across Wisconsin. And I'd like to point out that I did that without seeking any big billion-dollar tax giveaways or exemptions from our environmental laws. So I know that it can be done.
Big tax incentives. Okay, let's get to Foxconn. You're elected governor. You asked for a meeting with a senior Foxconn executive. You're also an attorney, so you will have reviewed the contract between Foxconn and WEDC. What will you say to that Foxconn executive? Will you say, let's tear it up, let's rewrite it, or I'm going to monitor you pretty closely?
Well, I think all of those are on the table. I mean, my goal is going to be to protect the taxpayers and to protect our natural resources. I think Wisconsin's a great place to do business, and if Foxconn wants to come, I think they should be welcome. But we need to make sure that they follow the laws just like my business and any other business across this state. We know that allowing companies to take our natural resources and destroy them, whether it's our Great Lakes water or draining our wetlands or polluting the air, is in the long run going to hurt our economy. And so we have to be very careful about that. And then certainly the cost to taxpayers at $4.5 billion is simply way too high. We can't afford that. And I think we need to do everything we can to prevent taxpayers from that catastrophe.
DNR, as you know, just issued air quality permits for Foxconn. 2 days later, the water diversion was approved from DNR. Is this being rushed?
Absolutely. I think if we had a
Would you as governor slow it down? Excuse me for interrupting.
Yes, no, and I don't think it's about slowing it down. I think it's about having an appropriate process that is evidence-based and science-based, and that puts the ability of Wisconsinites to actually breathe clean air and enjoy our waterways, which are publicly owned and held in trust. That is what should be central in the inquiry. And rather than just having an agency that does the governor's bidding and rubber stamps things without a proper scientific review, I think we need to empower our Department of Natural Resources to actually protect the health and well-being of Wisconsinites. And that's what hasn't been done.
There's been a lot of change at DNR over the last 6 years. Is DNR not as vigilant and weaker than maybe 2010? Let's just pick that year.
I mean, I think there's no question. You know, certainly we've seen so much political interference with scrubbing any mention of climate change, gagging the scientists so they can no longer comment on proposed legislation. Scientists have been fired or pushed out or retired and not replaced, and those who remain are often prevented from doing their jobs. We're letting polluters write their own permits, and that is not what Wisconsin should be. And you know, the DNR was one of the premier agencies for natural resource management for much of its history, and we can do that again. We can be a leader if we allow the DNR to actually achieve its mission.
So Governor Roy's first budget proposal with DNR would do what, ma'am?
Well, I think we need to restore funding that's been cut to DNR, and we need to remove the political interference. I support having an independent secretary who's not a member of the governor's cabinet, but is actually appointed by the DNR board, and making sure that the DNR is making decisions that are in the best interest of stewarding our resources, whether it's wildlife and addressing the chronic wasting disease crisis, or our public lands, or air quality and water quality.
What difference can one state, Wisconsin, make on climate change?
Well, Wisconsin can make a big difference in climate change, and the good news is that we can also have a positive impact on our economy by once again becoming a leader. Wisconsin was actually one of the first states in the Midwest to adopt a renewable portfolio standard, which says a certain percentage of our energy has to come from renewable sources.
Which has not been updated in 4 to 6 years.
It hasn't, and we have now lagged behind all of our peer states in the Midwest and given up a huge opportunity to create good paying jobs in a growth industry for our residents.
Do you know what our next energy renewability standard would be if you're governor?
Well, I've got young kids, and so I think far out into the future on these issues. I think that Wisconsin should be powered 100% by renewable energy by 2050, and I think it's absolutely doable, and it will help our economy grow as well.
I want to come back to student loans.
Thank you.
So I don't forget. So do you think the state should allow those with student debt to refinance it?
No question. Yes,
and
we should.
Your first budget would recommend that?
It would. Yes, I think this is a huge millstone around the necks of now 2 generations. People in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and even 60s have this massive payment, and it's not. It doesn't do anybody any favors when people are paying 7-8% interest on these higher loans, including our current governor.
Millennials don't vote in the same high percentage as boomers.
Not always.
That's true, but why should millennials be supportive of your campaign for governor?
Because I am talking about the issues that are relevant to my generation, Generation X, and our friends, the millennials. And that is things like climate change, things like student loan debt reform, affordable housing and transit, building livable communities, making Wisconsin a leader again. And I think that, when we talk about building an economy that works and making us the best place to raise a family and the best place to build a business, those are things that people my age and millennials are very excited about. And by electing me as governor, we are going to make Wisconsin a destination where, people who have been living here for 40, 50 years, their kids are going to want to come back and raise their grandkids here.
You graduated from Madison East. Madison East students have recently marched to the Capitol and protested for tougher gun laws. What changes should we make in Wisconsin gun laws, Kelda?
Well, I think we need to do a number of changes, some relating to who can actually buy weapons. I think that we need to have universal background checks that close all the loopholes, and that's now very easy to implement. We should reinstate the 48-hour cooling off period. Everybody knows when hunting season is, and you can plan appropriately, but if we want to prevent suicides and domestic violence deaths with guns, we need to do that. We should also have red flag laws to allow a loved one or law enforcement to go before a judge and temporarily suspend somebody's gun buying privileges. We also, I think, have to address the weapons side of it, and I support reinstating the assault weapons ban, as well as addressing high-capacity magazines and other modifications like bump stocks and silencers that can make these deadly weapons much more effective for mass shootings.
Governor Scott in Florida signed a bill that raised the age limit to buy a gun. Does Wisconsin need to raise the age limit?
I think we should do that. And in fact, I called on Governor Walker to join Rick Scott in doing that, right after he did it. I think this is, the more we learn about brain development, the more we understand that it takes until your mid-20s before your frontal lobe fully develops and you have that kind of long-term consequence ability to understand and make decisions.
Circling back to one other issue you mentioned, you said now that when we renew our car registration and we pay gas taxes, 23% of that goes to pay debt service.
Right. If
you could wave a wand, how would you pay for the state's highways into the future and maintenance?
Well, if I'd wave a wand, I'd just print money. But as governor, we have to make responsible choices, and I think we have to be honest with taxpayers. We do need to raise the gas tax, and we need to re-index it to inflation. It was a mistake to take that away, and that helped create the transportation funding crisis that we now find ourselves in. I also think that we need to look at the high capacity commercial vehicles that are really the ones that are doing a number on our roads. It's not my minivan or somebody's Prius that are wrecking our roads at such a high rate. It's winter, and it's these big semi trucks, for instance, that are carrying frac sand up and down the highways of western Wisconsin that are really costing much more than they're paying in terms of fair share for the maintenance of our roads.
At a Wisconsin County's event, Representative Hintz and Speaker Voss and Senator Fitzgerald said, tolling, bring it on. What's your position on tolling?
Well, I'm, I guess, skeptical but open-minded on tolling. I think there are a number of very significant questions that would need to be answered about tolling. And first among them is the loss of federal funds, because obviously it would mean a major shift in how we're funding transportation, and so I think we need to be really rigorous in our decision making when we even think about that. And I have other concerns about how it will affect low income and middle class workers as well.
If the feds remove the penalty, because you're right, it would take a change in federal law to allow us to do that.
Right.
But if they remove the disincentive, would you consider tolling then, or no, because of your concerns, as you just said, on the low income?
Yeah, I think we just need to take a hard look at it. I am open-minded, but I would say I'm not in the pro-tolling camp, certainly. And I do think that addressing the gas tax and user fees for these high-capacity commercial vehicles is a better way to go at this point.
Okay. Now let's go through some, if you're elected governor, your next budget, some items in the budget that you give the ledge. K-12 funding.
Yes.
New formula or what?
Well, yeah, I think we can adjust the formula that we have. There is no reason that kids in wealthy suburban districts should be worth $9,000 per kid, and in other rural school districts or in the north side of Milwaukee, they're worth $4,500 or $5,000. per kid. So we have to address that inequity and actually look at what resources are needed to educate the actual children we have in actual school districts. We also need to restore the $1 billion in funding that we're still down under the current governor's historic cuts to education. So certainly adding more money back into schools to get us where we were. And then I think we need to look at addressing early childhood education as well, as I mentioned. Child care costs in many parts of the state more than college tuition. And a lot of families can't afford a high quality place that they feel really good about their kids when they go back to work. So by expanding access to early childhood education, not only can we help address the systemic racial disparities that show up in education, but we can help ensure that every child gets a great start, regardless of the parent's income or the zip code that they're growing up in.
You've seen the numbers for MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools. Only like 63, 65, 66% of them graduate in 4 years. How would a Governor Roys help MPS?
Well, I think that this is in large part a resource question, right? If we have been taking money out of the schools and out of MPS, not just over the last 8 years, although that's been disastrous, but for much longer than that. We've had our schools and our university system on essentially a starvation diet. And, these have long tail effects, and it makes it harder for us to recruit and retain teachers. And what we know is that smaller class sizes and experienced teachers make the biggest difference for students. So we have got to find a way to help really great teachers stay in the classroom and not go to other states where they've got better options, and make sure that they're in the places in Wisconsin that need them most, and that's rural schools that are having a really tough time retaining and attracting teachers, as well as urban schools that have been underinvested in.
As a former legislator, you have watched the choice, the voucher program grow. I think it's now up to about $247 million, both in state GPR dollars and property tax dollars. What was your first budget due to the choice voucher program?
Well, here's an issue that I think differentiates me from others in the field. I think that we have had 27 years to look at the choice program. I think it has failed. Vouchers take money away from our public schools, and all the evidence shows that taken as a whole, they don't produce any better results, and in many ways, the results are worse, and there's no accountability to taxpayers. So we need to bring that program to a close with minimal disruption as possible to current students. I also think we need to be very skeptical of the expansion of private charter schools, because this is privatization by another name. And here's part of the problem with these privatization schemes. The money comes off the top, right? So they cherry pick their students. They get the voucher money at the beginning of the year based on enrollment. And then that money, whatever's left over, is what's sent out to our public schools all across the state. And if we are continually taking money away and without any oversight or protection for taxpayers, because private schools and charters don't have to follow the same reporting and accounting requirements as our public schools, we are really accelerating difficulties for our public schools. So we need to bring that to a close.
Well, to follow up on that, would your first budget then shut down choice statewide, but keep it for the city of Milwaukee and Racine?
Well, I would like to bring the entire voucher program to a close, but I think
immediately, or phase it out?
Well, I think we have to phase it out because there are families who are enrolled. I think the statewide expansion is much easier because the vast majority of those kids were already in private school, and this was basically just a giveaway to wealthy families to help subsidize private school education. So that's much easier. But I think in Milwaukee, and particularly, we have to be sensitive to parental needs and concerns, and their very real sense that the public schools are not serving their children. And so, we can't be kicking kids out of schools that they're in now. We have to give those schools the option to become public charters and if they want to continue receiving public funds, and make sure that their education is not disrupted, but that we're also not going to continue to funnel public money into those private, unaccountable schools.
How would your first budget fund the UW system?
With more resources than we've had previously. I think one of the worst changes that has happened in Wisconsin over the last 8 years is that we now spend more money locking people up in our correction system than we do on our entire University of Wisconsin system. That is an absolutely upside down priority. So I would like to see us incarcerate far fewer people and use those savings to actually invest them in an economic engine for our state rather than a drain, and put them towards our UW system.
You want to boost funding for K-12. You want to boost funding for the UW system. How do you pay for it? What changes in the tax structure would you propose?
Well, I think we have to stop these massive corporate giveaways, these big loopholes that allow the wealthiest among us and very big businesses to have a party that's paid for by the rest of us, by the middle class, by lower wage workers, and by small businesses. It is not fair, and it is starving our state of what we need to have a healthy and vibrant economy in the future.
Sounds like you'd go after the M&E manufacturing and farming exemption.
You got it.
Okay. Let's talk about, what would your first budget do on Act 10? Now, as you're well aware, Act 10, two components. Largely eliminate collective bargaining, but make state employees pay more for health and pensions. Would it repeal both sides or just one of them? Or give me your position on how much of that you would overturn, please.
Well, Steve, as you were well aware, during Act 10 protests,
we all lived through that.
Yes, we did. And night after night, I was in the Capitol as the caucus chair, and I helped hold the floor for 63 hours in opposition to this. I think that we have to stop attacking workers in the state, public sector, private sector. I support collective bargaining rights and the right of workers to have the option to join unions, so that they can bargain for fair wages and for working conditions. And I think it's true in prisons, it's true for nurses, it's true for teachers and firefighters, just as it's true for the folks who build our roads or the steel workers. So that's just a basic value I have. As an employer, I can't imagine being unwilling to sit down at the table with my employees to talk about wages and benefits and working conditions, period. I do think that, as people said during the Act 10 protests, it's really not about money. It's about dignity and respect for workers and making sure that they have a voice in their workplace. I have yet to meet a public worker who says, I'm unwilling to help the state make responsible fiscal decisions. And I think, that is one thing that am very cognizant of. We need a governor who's willing to make those responsible, tough financial choices that our current governor has been unwilling to make. And I think that public employees have been at the forefront of doing that. They have given up. A lot of them are seeing lower pay than they had 10 years ago, much higher costs for benefits. And ultimately that takes a lot of money out of our economy, because these are workers who are middle class, they're lower middle class, some of them might be upper middle class, but they spend their money. And so when working people have more money in their pockets, it is better for our economy because they go out and spend it. When we give big corporate tax giveaways to companies like Foxconn that already have billions of dollars in capital, they just hoard it or they buy back their stock. It doesn't do anything for our economy.
The state and public employees, are they paying too much for health and pensions, or are they paying their fair share?
Well, I think they are paying a lot, but I think, frankly, that's reflective of all workers are paying a huge amount, and frankly, employers are paying a lot for health care and benefits. And as we look to the future, to the next 20, 30, 40 years, what the economy is going to look like, it's not going to look like it did when my parents and grandparents were entering the workforce. You work 40 years for a company and you get a gold watch. That does not exist anymore, and we need our leaders to start addressing the massive structural changes in our economy, and that means we need to decouple benefits from employment. We need to make sure that when people move out of jobs, or if they're in the gig economy, or they're taking time off to care for a loved one or go back to school, that they're not going without health insurance, or that they're losing their retirement security. And part of my economic plan to help small businesses compete for and retain good workers in Wisconsin and help people start businesses is to make sure that we have universal paid family leave, that everyone can take 12 weeks of leave to take care of a loved one who's ill or dying, or a new baby, to make sure that everyone has access to health care, and that we make Badger Care available as a public option for anyone to buy into.
That was my next question, health care.
Yes.
In your first budget, make Badger Care available to who?
To any person or business who wants to buy into it, yep.
Okay. Do you support legalizing recreational marijuana?
Yes.
You do?
I
Why?
do. Because
source of revenue or other reasons?
both. I mean, number one, I think that states that have led the way on this have shown it can be a huge revenue booster and also can affect the number of opioid overdoses because people have a much less dangerous way to relieve chronic pain. And I think, I think there's a high bar. If the government wants to restrict an adult from doing something with his or her own body, I think there should be a very high bar for that, and I just don't see that marijuana meets that bar.
There are, depending on how you count, 12, 13, X number of Democratic candidates for governor. Does it make any difference to you if Mayor Barrett enters the field?
I welcome all comers. I think it's great that there's so many candidates stepping forward and so much enthusiasm on our side. I think that regardless of who's in the field, I am the best person to be governor of the state for the next several years as we try to make Wisconsin a leader again, and I'm certainly the best candidate to take on Scott Walker.
Tony Evers has led the early polls, emphasis on the early polls. Why are you a better candidate than Tony?
Well, I think that we need a candidate who can inspire people to actually go out and vote. I think people want to turn the page. And it's not about being against any of the other Democrats who are running or being even against Governor Walker. I'm running for governor because I want this state to fulfill its promise to be the best place to raise a family and the best place to grow a business. And people are responding to that message. People are ready for a new generation of leaders, and people are ready for a candidate who inspires them and can help bring the Gen X and the millennial voters to the polls, as well as engaging our progressive base who feel ignored. And frankly, I think we're going to get a lot of people who have given Walker a couple of chances but are ready for a new direction.
Well, that was my next question. What did your party do wrong when it didn't beat Scott Walker in 2010, 2012, 2014?
Well, I mean, part of the problem is, 2010, 2014 were really tough years nationally for Democrats, right?
Okay.
Walker's been very, very lucky in running in some very friendly years for Republicans. Now I think we have the wind at our backs, which is great. But I don't think it's enough because he's still going to be one of the best funded and most disciplined campaigners that we've seen. I mean, he's a darling of right-wing special interests, and he's got more billionaires than we've got Democrats running against him. So he's still a tough opponent. But I think if we aren't running against him but are running for the state that we want to build, that is what's going to excite people. Democrats win with hope. We win with optimism, and people are ready to look towards the future, and that's what I offer.
If you win the August primary, can you raise enough money to be competitive with the incumbent governor?
Absolutely, yes, I can.
You can. The Charles Franklin poll in March had you at 4%. Now that's 2 months ago. But
yes, before my video went viral.
So your response since then that you're finding statewide, you're obviously encouraged by it?
Very much so. Yeah, I mean, as I travel, and I'm putting a lot of miles on the car, people are excited. They're responding very positively to my message of not just the state that I want to build, but also my record of getting things done. Because that's another thing that sets me apart. I'm one of the few candidates in this race that has actually held elected office before and is qualified to be governor and has a long track record of progressive successes, getting things done. Whether Republicans and Democrats are in charge, I've been able to accomplish important priorities.
Final question, I want you to make a prediction. The winner of the August Democratic primary for governor will get what percentage? What percentage do you or X need to win?
I'm going to get 54% of the vote.
54% of the vote. We'll end on that.
Thank you.
Kelda Roys, thanks very much for coming in.
Great to see you
Appreciate
again.
it. Thank you very much.